with the Red Hook Community Farm, because that's really where my involvement with urban agriculture in New York City started. And certainly is the catalyst for the Design Trust project, so it's the Five Borough Farm. And I'll talk about 3 projects and sort of 3 things that were part of the original proposal and really critical to us. So urban farming as public space, as replicable and calibrated to a context, and then the importance of metrics, which is more fun than it sounds. So added value and the Red Hook Community, so added value is the umbrella organization, and the Red Hook Community Farm is the farm itself in Red Hook. It's about 3 acres, and it's on the site of a former ball field. For me, it's this really fascinating thing. It's this really amazing public-private partnership, kind of anomalous public-private partnership in some ways, but it's really an explicit social agenda. And added value uses urban agriculture as a vehicle for social change. It's not the primary driver. That said, urban agriculture is super, super integral to what they do. So that's like almost 10 years ago. This is the site as it looks now. This is probably a couple of years old, so it's even more lush and amazing than this is. And if you go there, you see IKEA. IKEA is directly across the street, so this kind of amazing dialogue. I wasn't involved explicitly with the original articulation of the farm. We're now developing the farm as a more explicit community center. It's something that the local neighborhood really asked for from added values, to make it a community center, to make it a more intentional public space. So we did some site analysis, sort of typical stuff. We also talked to a bunch of the farm workers and the local folks. And one of the things that they said was, it's really muddled about what is public and what's not public. And so people kind of wander through the farm, and sometimes they know where to go and they don't know where to go. Up in the left corner, that sort of circle is the community tent, very explicitly public. The farmer's market, public at certain times of the day and certain times of the week. And then sort of bike rack area, sort of people kind of feel like they're allowed to go there, but they're not 100% sure. This is very, I don't want to say crude, since I did it, but almost crude diagram. Very quick diagram talking about how we're using public space to begin to kind of reform the park, and using public space as a sequence or a kind of gradient as the primary pieces, and then to use architecture around that, rather than saying, here's architecture and then public space around. Here's what happens as the ancillary space. The other part of thinking about the farm added value in particular, but any farm as a public space, is that it's part of this larger context, and each farm really gets calibrated for that neighborhood. And we also, in our office, talk about this ripple effect. I think that's not the perfect word for it, but that there's a kind of feedback loop for progress that happens at the farm, or sustainability initiatives at the farm, that then get seeded out into the neighborhood, but also get reflected into changes at the farm. And the farm really functions as like a fulcrum of the neighborhood. I mean, it's a bit simplistic to say that there are 2 sides of Red Hook, but that kind of is true. There's a big public housing, almost 40,000 people living in Red Hook, right here, and then a kind of more gentrifying area in around Van Brunt. And the farm really functions as this place that people mix. This is another project that's really an outgrowth of that work with added value, a very kind of amazingly fast charrette that we did in response to the mowing to growing competition, Terraform won a couple of years ago. 5 days and we won, yay, of just like intensive work. And the premise here is that there are all those inaccessible lawns, unactivated public space, and most public housing occupies an area that is termed food desert. And you also have an incredible number of elderly in many public housing. There's sort of, I don't know if this is pretty dark up there, it's not super dark on my screen here, but so we call this Nork Farms, naturally occurring retirement community. It's actually a federal designation. Also Interborough, it's a great urban design firm, did a bunch of research about Norks here in New York City, a third of which are in public housing. So the idea here was to do this kind of spatial and social analysis and see the interconnections, to multiply benefits by the overlap of understanding the sort of spatial potential within public housing and the sort of social potential. So, back here. So the idea for NERC farms is that you create a set of agricultural systems that activate that elderly community and then activate this so-called underutilized space. And our big tagline for us was the tower in the park becomes the tower in the farm. And this actually has legs. We're doing a very small scale version of this with added value. Added value wasn't part of this really intensive charrette, but with the senior center we are doing a kind of small scale urban ag piece there. That's an outgrowth of added value. And the last thing I want to talk about is actually the student project. So the last 2 years I've taught a design build class through Pratt, actually through the planning department. It's called the Green Infrastructure Design Build Studio. And we looked last year explicitly at urban ag on rooftops. We did a series of designs for the Bowery Mission. The Bowery Mission now has a farm. A lot of that came through the enthusiasm of that really intensive 12-week class that we had. This year, the students were looking at a green roof on the Pratt campus. So Pratt got a DEP grant, and we basically said to students, how might we amplify the benefits of that green roof by adding additional social and ecological layers. Half the students looked at the farm, or the green roof in relationship to magnifying biodiversity, but the other folks looked at it through urban agriculture. And this is using metrics as a design tool to give a shout out to the actual students. So it was Triangdong, Brooke Mayer, and Christy Loki. They called it fourth story farmstead. And as teachers really said, like, look, you need to really understand the quantifiable aspects of the work that you're doing. This is very much linked, obviously, to the major agenda of the Five Borough Farm project. And said, let's do these metrics first, rather than kind of get into the spatial arrangement. Or the other thing to say, these are planning students, so they don't have necessarily a kind of intensive design background. For them, design is sort of visible, and we kept saying, all right, there's also a kind of strategic and honestly sort of procedural approach to design as well. They had to ensure that they were still adhering to the stormwater management goals of the DEP grant. So they did a series of kind of water metrics, ensuring that they were still meeting those water retention and retention standards. But they also looked at how a farm actually functions, and thinking very explicitly through the development of, in this case, they looked at kale. So getting very specific. So once you start looking through the sort of metrics lens, so to speak, the degree of specificity really got magnified. And it was the big thing that we learned as faculty. They also looked very explicitly at sort of the set of educational programs that might be linked to the farm. Again, the kind of sequence that happens, and really linking, ensuring that it's not kind of isolated island, but it's linked to its community context. Here's the plan. Some huge font here. This is actually the end of a lecture that I give to this class that starts with called What is Design? Again, these are not design students inherently, so I sort of go through those principles. And then we end with this question, like, can we develop a set of urban agricultural design principles? What would that look like? And it's sort of playing off the 11 tasks for urban design that Michael Sorkin did. Seems like a good place for us to end here. The number one thing is a total mouthful. Maximize multiple mutually reinforcing benefits. I know it needs to be much more elegant. But the elegant way to say that is a solution that begets solutions. It's one of my favorite quotes by Wendell Berry. It's about growing your own food, and I think that urban agriculture really embodies that. The other ones I'm not going to talk about explicitly, other than to make it an integral element of the city, and to not see it as this sort of anomalous thing or a piece of the country that's in the city, but an essential part of the city.